It's the 10th of January 2017, and we're talking to Bernard Wells about his life in Silverdale. Could you tell me about your childhood in the village, please, Bernard?
Well, started school at the infant school at opposite the board school in the corner of Downing Street, as was then. That was in 1939, which was the start of the war. So the first couple of years, we went to school with gas masks on and constantly interrupted any lessons to rush out to the shelters because the air raid siren would go off, and then we'd all have to rush off and hide in the shelter. And sometimes we could hear the explosions. And then when we got back into school, and if it was raining, the roof would be leaking. So we'd have buckets all around the classroom to catch the water that dripped through the roof that the bomb blast had damaged. And then, of course, come to the end of the war, and I progressed to the school across the road, which was the junior school, and I stayed there. Came off a big family. There was I got 3 brothers and 3 sisters, 7 of us all together. 9 with my mum and dad. And then I went to Nutton secondary modern. And when I was 12, I got a job taking milk for a gentleman named Ern Hubbard. We had a horse and cart, and there was 2 milk delivery men at that time. The other one was called Reuben Ford, and he had a horse and cart. And my first job was to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, get dressed and go and fetch the horse from Parkside, where Parkside is now. That was the field that we kept the horse in. And I'd have to take a piece of bread to entice him, to catch him, put the halter on, and then bring him down to the stable, which was in the back lane. Then we'd have to back him into the cart and put all the collar on and put all the fasten up to the cart and everything, and pull him out into the lane, and then the lorry with the milk would arrive. At that time it was nearly all churns, and with just a few, probably 2 crates of milk at that time, but mostly it was churns, and people put jugs out and we delivered milk that way. The boss used to come, Ern Hubbard, and he'd come on a bicycle, and then he'd transfer to the cart, and I would ride the bicycle. And to some of the customers that lived off the beaten track. I would then carry on until we got to the bottom of what was called Nutton Bank, which is still there, and then I would leave him there and go to school. And most mornings I was late because I had to wait until he told me to go. Also, my shoes were muddied up running across the field trying to catch the horse. So I got quite a lot of detentions. It did interfere with my schoolwork, but I got no choice on that. And then I left school at 15 and I got a job working at the Michelin. I wasn't very happy there. It was my dad as got me the job there. Although it was a good firm to work for at that time, I didn't like factory work at all. So in 1951, there was a big recruitment drive. The Labour Party were in power, and a big recruitment drive into the mines, which had been nationalised in 1948. And along with several of my workmates and schoolmates, went along there and got a job, and my first job was blacksmith striking. I worked with a gentleman called Bob Hughes, who was the blacksmith, and the engineer was Mr. James Beardmore.
Can you tell us what you used to do for entertainment in the village, please, Bernard?
Entertainment, right. Well, the main entertainment area on the village was the cinema, the Roxy Cinema, and then facing the cinema to the right of that was the Royal Oak Public House, and then to the right of that was a very popular dance hall, Spooner's Dance Hall, which at that time was run by the world amateur dance champion, Sid Perkins. And one of the interesting things where I used to take milk, I would deliver a bottle of red top milk, which was the opposite to what it is now, which was a full cream. And Sid would be at 7:30 in the morning. Sid Perkins would be dancing with the door open into the dance hall and all the lights on and dancing on his own. And I remember him with this red dressing gown, something that you never saw on the village like that. And then the local cinema, on the milk cart that we delivered, we always had an advert on each side of the cart. Now that meant that we had 2 free passes every week for every time it changed. So we had 2 free passes off the Roxy people for advertising, which at that time made me very popular because I would go to the cinema and take one of my friends, and later on I'd take my girl friends, and one of them was named Doreen, who I eventually married, and we were together for 51 years.
Can you tell us about your working life at the pit, please, Bernard?
I started at the pit in 1951, and my first job, I was a blacksmith striker, but at that time you had to be prepared to go anywhere and do anything that the engineer asked you to do. And just at this time, Lisset Colliery, which was better known as Madeley Colliery, was closing down, and we went there to help dismantling and sort of pick up anything that would be suitable for Silverdale Colliery, and then we would bring it back there. Anything that was useful, we found useful, we would bring back with us. One thing that always stuck in my mind with Liswick Colliery was in 1951, it was the National Exhibition at Oyles Court, and from Liswick Colliery they brought a lump of coal slung up under the cage and sent it off, and it was cut into one pure square metre of coal, and that was on display at the Festival Hall in London. Also, there used to come 2 gold and amber trucks, and that they used to be loaded with coal, and on the side it was Buckingham Palace, and that supplied the Queen's coal at that time, which was more or less pure anthracite, very rich coal, but of no use at all for industrial use, because it burned too quickly and it was far too expensive. Therefore, the colliery eventually closed, and most of the materials that were usable we fetched and used at Silverdale at that time. I was blacksmith striking. We made all our own tools, hammers, picks, axes, anything that the miners required, sharpening picks. We made all them by hand. But then, as things progressed, drop forging became the in thing. So it was far cheaper to buy these tools than it was to make them. So gradually it became phased out. We used to make our own chains, but then they phased those out because safety laws and everything had to be stamped and drop forged. So the blacksmithing part practically died out, apart from a couple of anvils and a couple of blacksmiths that were left. It all became welding after that. And we did all the welding, all types of welding at that time. Also, part of my job consisted of splicing ropes and installing and splicing, installing winding ropes and splicing underground haulage ropes. Then I was took over in charge of the shaft, in charge of the shaft man, and we opened up the drift mine in 1987. The head sticks were taken down, and the shaft was closed, and all the coal came up what was known as a drift mine, which we opened 5 years previous.
Can you tell us about closing down the number 17 shaft and taking down the head sticks, please?
Yes, well, this was a job that we had to apply to in 1987. We had to apply to his mines Inspector of Mines, Her Majesty's Inspector of Mines, to get to be able to use a and a settling cutter to remove the weights that were on the guide rods. There was 8 guide rods and 10 weights, approximately 10 weights on each rod, and these weighed in the region of 300 weight. This, we had to submit the plan of the whole work that we were taking on to dismantle the headsticks completely, remove the wheels and fit a platform and keep the shaft open for purposes of drainage and pumping out, which was a very wet shaft at that time. So the first job was to remove the weights. I had some assistance at this time from area shaftsmen because there'd been a big push on redundancy, and a lot of my own shaftmen had gone. So we had to add some extra help from area shaftmen at that time. The pit bottom consisted of 3 platforms, one where the cage used to settle when they were drawing coal, and then below that was the area where all the bottom of the guide roads were and the weights hung. And then below that there was also a pump platform where it pumped water which would gather at the bottom of the shaft. So one of the first jobs that the men did was to take out the first platform. Having removed that, and I have a video which shows this, they then started to secure the guide rods and then remove the weights. This was done with chains, which were light chains but good enough for the job. We then removed the weights and then each rod, and then when that was done we could then go back to the surface and start and remove the guide rods, and we would do this with the use of a large dumper type truck, and we would put chains on and pull the rods out. Now the chains at the bottom, with being light, would snap, so we could pull the rods straight out and lay them out all the way up the road, ready for cutting up. Once this was done, the next job then would be to remove the cages. But first of all we had to take the automatic gates which were installed for when we were drawing coal. They would have to come off, and then we'd have to fit temporary safety gates. Having done that, we would then lift the cage and pass 2 RSJs underneath for the cage to sit on. And once we'd done that, we then started to dismantle the cage but secure the winding rope, and then take the chains and all the lifting gear off the cage. Having done that, we would then start to remove the cage by using pulling equipment and pull it clear of the shaft. Once that was done, we were able to lift it out of the way with a large crane. Then we would start and pull the winding rope off, but at the same time as we were pulling that off, it would lift the cage from the bottom, the other cage from the bottom, and then we would pull it out so far, remove all the chains and all the equipment, and fasten that to a reel, which we then used to store the rope on, wind it on, at the same time as we were bringing the other cage up to the surface. Once we got the other cage up to the surface, the same procedure then applied, and we would install these RSJs, lower the cage onto the RSJs and dismantle that, and exactly the same as we'd done with the other side. Then we would the ropes, both ropes then, winding ropes would be off, so we could then concentrate on the wheels, which were also well documented on the video and other photographs. Having a very large crane, we then took the wheels off and lowered them down. Some of these were sent away different areas and used as models outside pit gates, but not ours. We never kept one for ourselves. Then the next job then would be to fit a platform across the shaft, roughly 2 meters below the surface, and this would be a solid steel platform with girders and steel plates, with attachment for pipes for pumping water out of the shaft once it became flooded. We then proceeded, once that was done, we proceeded to cut with the settling cutters, cut down the remaining headgear, and all that went to scrap, and eventually the whole lot was dismantled. I'm very proud of the fact that during all this process, not one person had any injuries whatsoever, not even a black fingernail, which it all went very well. One of the gentlemen, Alan Lofthouse, it was the deputy engineer, was excellent with his advice and his assistance throughout this. And also there was several other workmen that I'd like to mention, which was Brian Dale, he was a blacksmith, Michael Cadman, he was a welder, Russell Dumble, shaftsman.
I understand your brother was a successful artist. Could you tell us about him, please, Bernard?
Certainly. Donald was born in Silverdale, Staffordshire, back in 1929. He was one of 7 of us to Arthur and Alan Wells. Always showing an interest and talent in art, he studied at Newcastle-under-Lyme School of Art, where Jack Clarkson, an associate of the famous sculptor Henry Moore, taught him. Despite striving to establish himself locally, after several years of producing quality, unique works of art, he was finally rewarded with an opportunity to exhibit his work in a famous London gallery. His first solo exhibition was at the AIA Gallery, London, in 1962, and during the 60s he showed in many exhibitions in London, including the Drian Gallery, with which he was closely associated for a number of years. His work in bronze, plaster and stone can be found in numerous public and private collections, not only in this country but also in France, Germany, Switzerland, the USA, Poland and Australia. Donald has also exhibited at the Arts Council, the Carnegie Institute in Pittsburgh, the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw, and the Beaux Arts in Bath. More recently, he exhibited at the Pian Nobile and spent from 1992 to 1997 living, working and exhibiting in Crete. Now back living in London, Donald has successful exhibitions at the Harlequin Gallery in 1999 and 2003. And they plan to exhibit his work in the future. Examples of his sculptures are always available at the Harlequin Gallery, London, together with his works on paper covering the last 40 years, the latter not being available anywhere else. Donald came to London in the 50s and held his first solo exhibition at the AIA Gallery in 1962. From then on, he showed numerous exhibitions, including the Arts Council, Carnegie Institute, which I think I've mentioned, the Dream Gallery, London. He was associated with until its closure at the end of the 1990s. He was also part of the scene in the early days at the legendary Troubadour Club in Earl's Court, where he was responsible for some of the original decor. The Troubadour was one of the centres of intellectual and artistic life at the time. It was where Bob Dylan first played in this country and Private Eye was originally produced. There Donald and his friend, the painter Sam Welsh, mixed with the likes of Ken Russell and Richard Harris. But Donald's most vivid memory is of watching Lucian Freud eating steak. As Donald says, none of us could afford steak in those days. I'd also mention that he painted Shirley Bassey's bathroom in London. She, after several discussions, she wanted dolphins and sea scenes, which he did. However, I believe there was a problem in getting paid for this work.
Okay. Just to go back to your childhood, Bernard, could you tell us a bit more about your time when you were working on the milk round, please?
Certainly. Like I say, it was a 7-day-a-week job. I used to have to be up very early in the morning to fetch the horse and, as I said before, couple him into the cart, and then we'd start and deliver the milk, which was mostly in churns, and people would leave a jug and saucer on the doorstep, and I would have a measure which I'd measure the milk out into a can, which I'd have on the handlebars, and deliver to far off the track properties. This went on, like I say, 7 days a week, but on the Saturday morning I would have my wages, and it was always when we reached 176 High Street, where we lived, and would then give me my money, which was 5 shilling at that time, and then he would give me the milk and eggs bill for my mum, which I would then take in and hand over to my mum. Now, for some curious reason or other, the milk and eggs bill always came to 5 shillings. And then my mother would go out with a carrot for the horse, which was named Fanny, and give the horse a carrot and earn the 5 shilling, which I suspect he'd just given me. When I was at school, at lunchtime, I had to run home and pick the horse up out of the stable where Ern had left him, and then put a halter on her, and then take her up the field, ready to pick up again next morning, grazing up the field. I was very popular with some of the lads. They would come with me just to have a ride on the horse.